The applause thundered through the ballroom of the Grand Hyatt, echoing off marble and crystal like a storm trapped in glass. Under the glow of chandeliers, every surface gleamed faces, gowns, champagne flutes, as if the whole night had been polished to perfection. I stood beside my husband, Adrian Ward, co-founder of Nova Edge, our billion-dollar dream turned reality. Cameras flashed, hands reached out to shake ours. From the outside, we looked like the picture of triumph, the golden couple who had built an empire from code and sleepless nights. For a moment, I almost believed the illusion myself. My jade-green silk gown shimmered with each breath I took. My hair was swept into the same bun Adrian once said made me look like discipline dressed as beauty. I smiled, poised and practiced. Inside, my heart was both full and strangely restless, as if some quiet part of me already knew that happiness built on denial always trembles before it falls. 5 years ago, I had left a promising career in Boston to chase his vision, our vision. I traded certainty for partnership, believing love and ambition could coexist without jealousy, without fracture. Together, we had written the first line of Nova Edge's code, shared takeout dinners under flickering fluorescent light, and dreamed of this very night. And now, here we were, the dream fulfilled, the summit reached, the cameras watching. Adrian's voice carried through the hall, warm and commanding. He spoke of perseverance, of innovation, of the unbreakable bond that had carried him through storms. I listened, proud, though something inside me tightened with each word. Then his tone softened to hesitation so delicate, only a woman who'd memorized his voice could hear it. "And tonight," he said, pausing, "I want to thank one person, the heart behind everything I've achieved. Without her, none of this would have been possible." My chest fluttered. My lips parted in a small, involuntary smile. I thought he meant me, but his gaze was fixed somewhere else beyond the footlights, toward a shadow near the stage. "Lydia," he called gently, "come up here." "Oh." The music faltered. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Then she appeared young, graceful, in a white dress that did little to hide the curve of her belly. Applause, confused, hesitant, rose again as Adrian extended a hand to her. He held it with a tenderness I hadn't seen in years. And in that blinding light, I saw what everyone else did. The public coronation of the man's betrayal. My breath caught. My smile froze. The sound of clapping turned hollow, distant, cruel. In that instant, every sacrifice, every night of building his empire, collapsed into silence. He had not only chosen another woman, he had chosen to destroy me in front of the world. If you've ever believed love could keep someone from changing, stay with me. This is my story not of heartbreak, but of awakening. And if you believe every woman deserves her moment of truth, subscribe and walk beside me through it. After the public humiliation, I drive through the city night to my mother Helena's house and allow myself to break for the first time. In the shelter of her steadiness, I confront the second wound evidence from Elijah that Adrian and his mother Vivian have been siphoning company funds to a shell firm to leave me indebted and erased. What I thought was a single betrayal becomes a deliberate architecture of harm. At the edge of despair, my mother puts a hand on my shoulder and draws a line in the sand. Collapse or rise. I choose to rise. There are nights when I sit in silence, listen to my heart split into small, careful pieces, and still manage a smile as if nothing is happening. The hours after the party felt like one of those nights, only larger, heavier, with a quiet that swallowed the whole city. I didn't go home. Home already felt like a rumor. I drove without music, window cracked to the cold, letting Manhattan's lights smear into thin, watery lines. Every red light was a metronome counting the seconds since the last time I believed in us. The silk gown I had been so proud of now clung to me like a wet promise. My fingers smelled faintly of roses. I thought I would hate that scent forever. My mother's house sat back from the street, brick and calm, the sort of place that refuses hysteria. I parked crooked, half on the curb, like someone who had outlived precision. The porch light came on before I rang. Mother's no. Helena Ward opened the door, and everything I'd been holding in fell through me. No speeches, no composure. I collapsed into the arms of the woman who once told me strength isn't how loud you shout, but how quietly you stand when the room tilts. She didn't ask what happened. The world had surely already told her. She just held me until my shaking turned into breath. She made tea the good kind, the one she saves for bad news, and let me sit at the kitchen table in a dress built for triumph, not for grief. The house hummed with the ordinary, the refrigerator, the street outside, the distant tick of an old clock that never rushes. When I could finally speak, the words came out flat and almost polite, like minutes from a meeting no one wanted to attend. "He thanked someone," I said. Then he called her to the stage. My mother's eyes, steady as stone, didn't flinch. She put a cup in my hands. "Drink," she said. It wasn't an order. It was a bridge. I wish the worst thing that night had been the applause. But pain has a way of introducing its older cousins. Before the tea cooled, the doorbell rang again. I saw the shape through frosted glass and knew it by posture alone. Elijah. Loyal, precise, the kind of man who notices details and leaves no fingerprints. He looked exhausted in the way people do when their conscience refuses sleep. "I'm sorry to come like this," he said, voice low, eyes flicking to my mother, asking for permission to be blunt. She nodded once. He opened a folder fat with paper and a small drive taped to its spine. "There's a company, Seraphine. AM Solutions LLC, formed 18 months ago in Delaware. No website, no footprint worth naming, but it has invoices many paid by Nova Edge. Consulting, strategy, executive facilitation, vague nouns, clean logos, and big numbers." He spread pages across the table: transactions, wire details, vendor approvals carrying Adrian's digital signature, and 2 separate authorizations at the board level stamped by Vivian. The numbers marched down columns like soldiers. I felt nothing for a moment, just a hollow, clinical awareness, like a doctor watching her own scan. "Here," Elijah said, tapping a cluster of payments, "is where it curdles. Funds fan out same day, sometimes same hour into accounts that trace to a family trust. And the timing, Seraphine. The first transfer hit the week after Nova Edge closed Series D. The kettle ticked behind us, cooling, forgotten. It gets uglier," he went on gently, like easing a blade from a wound. "I found a draft. A proposed asset division. If you sign, you absorb operational liabilities. The shell invoices become debt. Your equity shrinks, his expands. They're trying to box you into a corner and call it settlement." My mother didn't move. Her stillness made the room safe enough for me to unravel. Betrayal is one thing. Larceny with a letterhead is something colder. I looked down at my hands and realized I was pressing crescents into my palms. I let go and watched the marks fade. "This wasn't heat of the moment," I said. "It was architecture." Elijah nodded. "Blueprint on top of blueprint." "Oh." In the back of my skull, a reel began to play. Late meetings I hadn't been invited to. Calendar invites that arrived too late to matter. A sudden concern for image that edged me off the stage I helped build. The little nothings that add up to a story you didn't agree to star in. I remembered Vivian's smile the night the cameras found Lydia. It wasn't surprise. It was a seal. I thanked Elijah because gratitude keeps a person human, even in the middle of fire. He looked like he wanted to apologize for the facts themselves. "I can dig deeper," he said, "but I didn't want you walking blind." After he left, the house settled. My mother stayed at the table with me in the soft lamplight that flatters no lies. She didn't rush to fix what had been deliberately broken. She didn't defame Adrian to make me feel better. She refused to let my pain shrink me into vengeance. Instead, she poured fresh tea and placed one hand warm, deliberate over mine. "You have 2 choices," she said, voice low and certain. "Collapse or stand up and take back what is yours." I breathed. The sentence hung between us like a drawbridge. Collapse would be easy, give in to humiliation. Let their paperwork bury me. Let history file me under scandal and be done. Standing up would be arithmetic, evidence, law, a long walk through corridors where empathy is optional and facts are currency. It would mean stepping back into rooms that wanted me quiet and becoming louder by becoming exact. I stared at the folder Elijah had left. The documents looked harmless, printed in the same office fonts that had once celebrated our milestones. I understood then that corruption rarely wears horns. It arrives dressed in compliance and CCs. I took off my earrings, set them on the table, and felt lighter by a fraction. Somewhere a siren threaded the night and then disappeared. My mother refilled my cup. "Eat something," she said gently, sliding a plate toward me, as if nourishment itself were an argument for living. When I finally spoke, my voice surprised me. It came from lower in the body, where decisions gather. "Okay," I said. "We do this properly. We don't burn. We build. We document, file, counter, and take the oxygen from their story. No public scenes, no tabloid joy, just truth." Mother's mouth tilted pride without performance. "Good," she said. "Then we begin in the morning." But I didn't want the night to end without telling the truth to myself. I stood, walked to the window, and watched the quiet street. I let my reflection meet my eyes, the same woman who had been applauded under chandeliers, now framed by a kitchen curtain in her mother's house. I tried to find the point where the two versions met. There is always a moment after the blow when the body asks a question. Who are you now? I didn't have the full answer yet, but I could feel its outline. A woman who would not hand over the pen that writes her own name. I changed into one of my mother's sweaters, sleeves too long, comfort by design. I folded the gown into a neat square and slid it into a bag. Rituals matter. They tell the nervous system what the soul has already decided. In bed, sleep did not arrive. Thoughts sorted themselves into piles. Call the lawyer my mother trusts. Pull my earliest notebooks. Secure backups. List allies. Think of the engineers who knew where the real work lived. I remembered an old saying my grandfather kept above his desk. Make noise with your evidence, not your anger. I let the words settle. Just before dawn, the city exhaled. I stepped into the hallway and found my mother awake, already dressed, as if grief had also set an alarm for her. She touched my cheek the way she used to when a scraped knee felt like the end of the world. "Eat first," she said, "then fight." I smiled, small and real. "In that order?" "In that order," she said. We ate toast with too much butter. It tasted like permission. When we were done, I slid Elijah's folder into my bag and felt the weight of it against my hip. Evidence, like love, changes how you carry yourself. On the way out, I paused at the door and looked back through the rooms that had held my first surrender and my second beginning. I thought of the night at the hotel, the applause, the roses, the soft cruelty of spectacle, and felt something unexpected. Gratitude for clarity, even when it arrives dressed as ruin. Outside, the air had that early morning honesty I've always trusted. I gripped the rail, felt the chill in the metal, and told myself a simple truth. Whatever they had built against me, they had underestimated my patience. I stepped into the day. I understood then that some lies hurt more than the truth, not because they're sharper, but because they're designed to be beautiful. Seraphine begins rebuilding her strength with precision. Guided by her mother Helena and the sharp-minded lawyer Roberta Caldwell, she starts gathering evidence paper trails, old prototypes, signatures that prove ownership. The process of reclaiming truth becomes her new act of survival. But when she returns to the house she once shared with Adrian to retrieve her original notebook, she meets him one last time. In that quiet confrontation, love dies without drama, and war silently begins. I no longer cried. Tears were a luxury I could no longer afford in a war. The world after betrayal grows quieter, not because there's peace, but because pain once named stops shouting. Days blurred into one another. Mornings of cold coffee, legal documents spread across the dining table, nights lit by the sterile glow of a laptop. I learned that healing wasn't rest, it was labor. My mother arranged the meeting. "She's the kind of woman who never wastes a word," she said, and she was right. Roberta Caldwell was in her late 60s, hair silver like frost, eyes the color of steel. She greeted me with a handshake that meant business, not comfort. "I don't do sympathy, Mrs. Ward," she said. "I do facts. Emotion builds stories, evidence wins wars." Her words didn't sting. They steadied me. We spread the papers Elijah had found across her desk like battle maps. She traced the routes of stolen funds with a pen, her voice calm and surgical. They moved money through layered LLCs. Clever, but not invisible. "You'll need the originals, emails, drafts, design records, anything with your authorship or timestamp. Think like an architect building a timeline." I nodded. And just like that, the war began. It wasn't the kind fought with shouting or revenge. It was a quiet dismantling, piece by piece, of lies. I returned to Nova Edge's old drive, accessing archived folders where my name had been slowly erased from credits. Every deletion told a story. I collected evidence like prayers. The first proposal with my signature, early memos to the board, concept sketches for our software framework, handwritten and dated. A prototype coded under my account, still time-stamped 3:12 a.m. 5 years ago, back when love was still collaboration. Each file I recovered was a memory sharpened into a weapon. Still, one crucial piece remained: the brown leather notebook. I had kept it in a drawer of our home office, the one Adrian and I used to share, before it became his alone. It contained the first handwritten algorithm design, the core structure of Nova Edge's system. Proof that everything began with me. I told myself I'd only stay long enough to retrieve it. When I arrived, the house looked the same, yet foreign, like a photograph of a life I no longer lived. The scent of cedar polish and his cologne still lingered. A wine glass sat abandoned on the counter. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked older, steadier, less breakable. Upstairs, in the study, I opened the drawer. The notebook was there, worn at the edges, pages filled with my handwriting notes, formulas, late-night corrections. A whole era compressed into paper and ink. As I turned to leave, a shadow crossed the doorway. Seraphine, Adrian's voice familiar, frayed. He stood there in the half-light, looking smaller than I remembered. His tie was loose, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. For a brief second, the old reflex of compassion stirred in me. Then I remembered what compassion had cost. "I thought you'd come," he said. "I wanted to talk before this gets uglier." I didn't answer. I slipped the notebook into my bag, zipped it, and looked up. He took a step closer. "Seraphine, please, stop this. We don't have to destroy each other. His voice broke slightly. "I still love you." Love. The word sounded foreign in his mouth now, too expensive for a man who had traded it for power. I smiled small, controlled. "Do you love me?" I asked quietly. "Or the things I built for you?" The silence between us said everything. For a moment, neither of us moved. It wasn't anger that filled the air, it was finality. The kind that doesn't shout, it just closes a door softly and leaves it closed. He reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. The movement was simple, untheatrical, but it drew a border even he could understand. "That notebook belongs to the company," he said finally, voice low. "No," I replied, meeting his gaze. "It belongs to its creator." I walked past him, feeling his eyes follow me, heavy with regret or perhaps fear. I didn't turn to check which. Downstairs, I paused at the threshold one last time. "You should know," I said without looking back. "The woman you married is gone. But the one who's coming for you, she doesn't cry." The door clicked shut behind me. The sound was clean, almost kind. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain. I stood under the gray sky and realized that the most dangerous kind of war isn't loud, it's patient, precise, inevitable. That night, as I placed the notebook on Roberta's desk, she looked up from her files and gave the faintest nod. "Good," she said. "Now we have proof." I sat across from her, the weight of the day pressing against my chest like armor being fitted. For the first time since the betrayal, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a witness. There's a moment when silence stops being surrender and becomes strategy. That night, I crossed that line and I never went back. Seraphine rises from the ashes with quiet determination. Guided by her mother and Roberta Caldwell, she begins legal proceedings against Adrian and Nova Edge, even as she builds a new company, Aurora Systems, to reclaim her purpose. Her resilience becomes both shield and sword. But when Lydia, Adrian's pregnant lover, seeks mercy, Seraphine's compassion meets the unflinching steel of her newfound boundaries. The courtroom becomes the true battleground, and the world watches as the empire that once humiliated her begins to crumble. They say pressure makes diamonds, but before that, it crushes everything soft inside you. The weeks after retrieving my notebook felt like a blur of signatures, sleepless nights, and strategy meetings that tasted of caffeine and resolve. The air around me carried a new kind of silence, not grief anymore, but focus. Mother, Roberta, and I worked like a single organism, precise, measured, deliberate. The lawsuit was drafted line by line, stripped of emotion, built only from proof. When Roberta slid the final version across her desk for my signature, she looked at me over her glasses. "Once you file this," she said, "there's no turning back." I met her gaze and smiled faintly. I never planned to. Filing those papers was less like revenge, and more like exhaling after holding my breath too long. At the same time, I began to build something new. Aurora Systems. The name came to me one morning before dawn, a reminder that light always returns, even after the longest night. I gathered a small team of engineers, most of them young, underpaid, and hungry for a cause. We worked out of a rented warehouse where the walls still smelled of paint and ambition. Every morning I arrived before everyone else, turning on the lights one by one. The hum of machines replaced the noise of heartbreak. Lines of code scrolled across screens like prayers whispered to the future. Some nights, I'd look at the clock and realize I hadn't spoken in hours. I was no longer trying to outrun the pain, it had become fuel. A month into the new company, the first ghost from my old life arrived. Lydia. She came to the office unannounced, a soft knock interrupting the rhythmic clatter of keyboards. When I opened the door, she stood there, pale, tired, and visibly pregnant. Her hands trembled as she clutched her purse. "Seraphine," she said, voice breaking, "please, don't go through with this lawsuit. Adrian is falling apart. He's terrified. I'm about to have his child." I didn't. For a long moment, I just looked at her. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She was the kind of woman I might have pitied once. "Do you know," I said quietly, "how long I spent believing that saving a man would save myself?" She shook her head, confused. "If you truly care for that child," I continued, "you'll teach it what truth costs and what betrayal never earns." Her face crumpled. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. "No one ever does," I said. "They just do it anyway." Clay. When she left, I felt no hatred, only a strange, aching clarity. Mercy, I realized, doesn't always mean forgiveness. Sometimes it means not destroying someone even when you could. Weeks later, Adrian struck back. His lawyers filed a countersuit, accusing me of stealing intellectual property from Nova Edge. The irony was almost elegant. Roberta warned me it would happen. "Desperation breeds noise," she said. "Stay quiet. Truth has better timing than rage." The court hearing drew media like moths to flame. Tech CEO battles his ex-wife in billion-dollar scandal. I remember walking into that courtroom, my heels echoing against marble, the weight of every gaze pressing down on me. Adrian sat across the aisle, jaw tight, hands clasped. He looked like a man defending his crown. But crowns don't matter when the kingdom's built on theft. When my turn came to testify, I opened the brown notebook. The page's ink faded, corners curled, spoke louder than any speech. I showed the original design sketches, dated months before Nova Edge was even incorporated. Then came the emails, the timestamps, the testimonies of engineers who'd worked beside me in those first chaotic years. Every word was a brick returned to its rightful wall. Adrian's team tried to interrupt, object, twist. But each question only strengthened the timeline. Roberta's calm dismantling of their arguments was art-precise, unflinching, surgical. When the judge finally leaned back and said, "It's clear the intellectual foundation predates Nova Edge's incorporation," I saw something in Adrian's face break, not anger recognition. He knew it was over. Outside, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. "How does it feel, Mrs. Ward?" I paused at the courthouse steps, the spring wind lifting my hair. "It feels," I said softly, "like the truth finally got a microphone." By evening, headlines spread. The fall of the innovator king. Nova Edge faces lawsuit amid ownership scandal. Aurora Systems emerges as new power in tech. I didn't smile, not even when I saw the news on screen. Victory, I learned, isn't joy. It's quiet relief that you're still standing. That night, I returned to the warehouse, where my small team was still coding, unaware of the storm outside. I watched them for a while, their focus, their laughter, their belief. It struck me that beginnings often wear the same face as endings. It's only later you realize which one it was. I sat at my desk, opened my notebook, and wrote one sentence. "Let them call me ruthless. I call it remembering who I am." Sometimes strength isn't loud or beautiful, it's simply the refusal to break when the world expects you to. And I finally had learned how not to break. When the truth finally surfaces, Adrian and his mother Vivian begin to unravel. The empire they built on deceit begins to collapse under its own weight. As they scramble to flee the country, new evidence emerges, damning recordings from an insider exposing everything: money laundering, tax evasion, and plans to erase Seraphine entirely. The law closes in. And Seraphine, once the outcast, becomes the silent witness to poetic justice, calm, patient, and free. They say that when an empire falls, it doesn't roar, it groans. Slowly, painfully, under the weight of its own lies. Adrian used to call me his compass. I used to believe him. But even compasses break when too many false directions are forced upon them. After the trial, the headlines didn't fade. They multiplied, like vultures circling what was left of Nova Edge. Investors withdrew. The board disbanded. Government auditors began to dig deeper than anyone expected. Every false invoice, every shell company, every whispered cover-up turned into a thread, and threads, once pulled, never stop unraveling. I didn't have to fight anymore. The truth was doing that for me. Roberta kept me updated. "They're panicking," she said over the phone one morning. "Selling assets, closing accounts. Vivian's name is popping up in wire transfers across 3 countries. It's only a matter of time." I listened quietly, staring at the rain streaking down my window. There was no satisfaction, only a kind of stillness that felt earned. Once, I would have wanted to see Adrian beg. Now, I just wanted him gone far away from the place where I had learned to breathe again. Weeks later, another storm arrived. Not outside, but on my screen. A message, unsigned, appeared in my inbox. Subject line: "You should have these." Attached were a series of audio files, short, fragmented, but unmistakable. The first voice was Adrian's, the second, Vivian's. They were discussing liquidating unnecessary liabilities. And one of those liabilities was me. "We can't let her resurface with the code," Vivian said, calm as a surgeon. "If she does, the investors will side with her." Adrian hesitated. "She won't fight that hard. She's not built that way." Vivian laughed. "Then you don't know the woman you married." I paused the recording there. The irony tasted sharp. Another file followed talk of offshore transfers, tax optimization, falsified statements to inflate the company's worth. There was even a moment of silence where Adrian muttered, "She'll hate me for this." And Vivian replied, "Let her hate you. She's useful only when quiet." The person who sent them didn't sign their name, but the metadata revealed it. Ethan Hale, Nova Edge's former head of finance. I remembered him quiet, polite, the kind of man who always kept the receipts. I forwarded the files to Roberta. Within hours, the FBI had them. By nightfall, the agents had enough to move. It happened on a Friday evening. I was working late at Aurora Systems when my phone rang. Roberta's voice came through, steady but softer than usual. "Seraphine," she said, "it's done. They've been arrested. Adrian and his mother. Wire fraud, conspiracy, tax evasion. The works." I didn't speak. I just stared at the reflection of myself in the glass wall. A woman surrounded by light, standing where darkness once lived. Outside, rain was falling again, the kind that smells like the world is being rinsed clean. "You okay?" Roberta asked. "Yes," I said after a moment. "I think I am." I hung up and turned off the lights, one by one. The warehouse fell into quiet darkness, except for the glow of city lights through the high windows. I sat by the glass, listening to the sound of water hitting concrete. Somewhere across town, the empire that once humiliated me was collapsing, not with flames, but with paperwork, handcuffs, and silence. Later that night, the news broke. Tech mogul, Adrian Ward, and mother arrested in federal investigation. Nova Edge faces bankruptcy amid scandal. Ex-wife's testimony led to unraveling of tech giant. People called it justice. But to me, it was something quieter balance. I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the city blur through rain. There was no victory in me, no laughter, no cruelty. Just the calm understanding that everything returns to where it belongs, even truth. I thought of the woman I had been. Naive, trusting, building an empire with a man who couldn't tell love from ownership. And I thought of the woman I was now, free, unbreakable, and finally still. When I closed my eyes, I could almost hear my mother's voice again. Justice doesn't need to be loud, Seraphine, it just needs to arrive. It had. And when it did, it didn't knock. It simply walked in. There's a peace that only comes after the fire, not the peace of forgetting, but of knowing you survived the truth. That night I learned, justice never asks for permission. It simply waits for you to stop bleeding long enough to notice it's here. A year has passed since Adrian's fall. Aurora Systems stands tall, born from the ruins of betrayal. Seraphine visits Elijah and his family, finding warmth and forgiveness in ordinary peace. Through reflection and renewal, she writes in her new journal not as a woman who lost everything, but as one who discovered herself through loss. As the sun rises, she finally lets go, realizing that even ashes can give birth to light. I used to think losing everything would destroy me. But sometimes, it takes being burned to learn how to grow back from ashes. A year has passed since that night when justice quietly came. The noise faded, the headlines disappeared, and what remained was life raw, unglamorous, honest. Aurora Systems has become what I once dreamed Nova Edge could be, a company built not on vanity, but on integrity. My small team grew into a family of thinkers, dreamers, and builders who believe technology can still serve truth. Every time I walk through those glass doors, I feel a quiet pride not in what I own, but in what I survived. The world moved on, as it always does. Adrian's name appears only in footnotes now, a cautionary tale about greed dressed as genius. And I, once defined by his shadow, have learned to stand in my own light. One weekend, I drove out of the city to visit Elijah and his family. He had left the corporate world behind, trading boardrooms for wide fields and laughter. His little daughter ran barefoot through the grass, her hair catching the afternoon sunday. His wife brought out lemonade, and the scent of fresh soil filled the air. We talked about ordinary things, weather, gardens, the small mercies of everyday life. For the first time in years, my heart didn't ache when it was quiet. I didn't need noise to feel alive anymore. When Elijah's daughter handed me a wildflower, I tucked it into my notebook. It wasn't just a gesture. It was proof that beauty grows again, even after the ground has been scorched. That night, back in my apartment, I opened a new journal, its pages blank, waiting. I wrote on the first line, "Failure didn't kill me. Betrayal only showed me the true worth of loyalty." Then I set the pen down and looked toward the horizon. The first light of dawn slipped through the curtains, pale gold and forgiving. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted by the past, only grateful for the clarity it brought. "Thank you, Adrian," I whispered into the stillness. "Because of you, I learned to stand without anyone holding me." The city below began to stir cars, footsteps, life in motion. And somewhere within me, I felt something rare and whole. Peace. Maybe we don't rise after the fire. Maybe we rise through it. Because even from ashes, the heart remembers how to bloom.